Hello, welcome to Valley Veterans, a program highlighting veterans from the Miami Valley and produced by the Miami Valley Veterans Museum. We're located at 2245 South Connolly Road, 25A in Troy, Ohio. If you wish to contact us, please use the phone 937-332-8852. That information will be presented on the screen and repeated throughout our program. We have a wonderful website and a Facebook page, and all of these programs that are produced down here at DATV go on the YouTube. They're available on YouTube and also available on low power or local public access stations. So I want to welcome our guest here today, a man who has been introduced many times in many ways, all of them favorable as you would to an honorable veteran, and that's Harry Ashburn. Welcome, Harry. It's good to see you.
Thank
Very
you. Good to be with you.
Harry comes today to the studio. His wife, Pat, has accompanied him. And I want to mention that much of what is available for me to ask Harry today came through articles produced by a writer and a teacher at Edison State Community College. You might notice Harry's wearing an Edison State Community College shirt, which was presented to him and Harry Christie at a Miami Valley Veterans Museum breakfast just a couple weeks ago. And we enjoyed passing these gifts on to them, and we've enjoyed now their presence with us today. Harry, I have questions, and we've talked already a little bit beforehand. I want you to feel comfortable just sharing experiences, and be free to correct my notes if need be. Okay. Certainly is fine there. I want to use a little bit of introduction here. Many of us are familiar with the term the greatest generation. Tom Brokaw penned that in a book. And I certainly honor that term very much so. My father was in World War II as well as my father-in-law. And we honor you today, of course, as a veteran of that war. And we take it as a privilege to have you on Valley Veterans. This is being produced in the summer of 2021. It'll be watched in many places, many times. But Harry, this is your 99th year?
I'm in the 99.
You're in the 99.
I'm not quite there yet.
Tell us a little bit of what your secret is to longevity.
Well, there are a couple things. One of them is sitting right here with us, my wife of 60 plus years. I come from a family that were 6 children, and 4 of us reached our 90s plus.
Wow.
And 1 in the 80s, so there's something to be said for the genes there as well.
I guess people would like to know your diet, something that propelled you into this age.
I'm not the world's greatest eater. I could live on pizza, I suspect, and many Italian foods. I'm not as loyal as I ought to be, so I'm very fortunate to have lived the way I have.
Uh-huh.
But nothing special there, really.
Well,
don't overindulge.
Don't overindulge.
Yeah.
That's right. Don't go to extremes, right?
That's it.
Exactly. Harry's got an interesting story relative to World War II, and much of it takes place near the end of World War II, when the freeing of our POWs. Harry, just share with us what you observed to those men.
All right. The freeing of the prisoners from the Cabanatuan prison camp took place, I believe, in late January, shortly, a couple weeks after our invasion there. I wasn't in on the freeing of them, but a couple of days afterwards, when we were delivering to a hospital, we saw some of these men all cleaned up now in nice, clean clothes, but very emaciated, very haggard looking. But we weren't allowed to talk with them. I had a friend who was a prisoner of the Japanese, a high school companion. I was wanting to find out if he was among those, and they wouldn't let me talk to him. So I don't know to this day whether he was or not. But it was something to see those people and to be aware of what we went through to get those guys out from under the hands of the Japanese.
Oh, I can imagine. I know those that liberated the concentration camps and the awful scenes that they carry with them to this very day. And you're watching your fellow soldiers here as to come out of this. I think I'm a Vietnam veteran, and I look back at those that were freed after a number of years in the Vietnam concentration camps. And you always hope and pray that it won't happen again.
Yes, for sure.
For sure. Your experiences there, driving a truck and supplies, any particular experience or event or observation when you were in those trucks?
No, we most of the combat we saw was when under fire from the air when we were in those trucks. We didn't encounter much ground fire. But I can remember in the earlier part of the war when we were down in the Solomon Islands, we spent most nights in our foxholes trying to wait out the air raids from the Japanese. And the foxholes themselves are another story, because that was a coral island and you didn't dig them. You chopped and chipped to get a foxhole dug, and that was a long-term project in itself. But we felt pretty secure in them, so, and they did the job at the time.
You know, I don't think the average person, including myself, thinks about digging through coral.
I wouldn't want to do it now.
Not at all. My, oh my. So we picture a foxhole and sand and digging in it about 15, 20 minutes and diving into it. And you're talking about something that must have taken quite a bit of time and energy.
Couple of days usually.
And you're under fire.
Yeah.
Yeah, from the Japanese in the air. Over these many years, your experiences and recollections have been shared, and oftentimes, as I mentioned before, with Vivian Blevins, professor at Edison State Community College, who has been a tremendous supporter of veterans and their stories.
She certainly has.
Certainly has, and I'm sure that material that she's written up would be could be expanded even more so. There's so many different stories that come out of this. Of your military experience there, can you recall a particular event that came to mind as a joyful experience?
I guess the most joyful would have been the end of the war. We were on Luzon, and I was scheduled to leave, go back to the United States after almost 3.5 years overseas for a 60-day leave, and then we were to come back for the invasion of Japan. And I was sitting in the orderly room. We were playing cards, playing pinochle, as a matter of fact. And the word came over that the Emperor of Japan had announced the surrender. So that was a happy day. I felt then, and correctly, that I would be going home and wouldn't have to be coming back then, which is probably a blessing, because the invasion of Japan would have been no good for anybody.
I've heard, many reports and documentaries and commentaries on the choices that were made with the Enola Gay and the Hiroshima and so forth, and how many lives would have been taken had there been an invasion.
Yeah.
So you observe that idea right up front.
Yeah, I know that it's a bit controversial, but I'm convinced it was the right thing to do, to drop those bombs at that time.
My father also served in the South Pacific, and I'm sure were he here today, he would share your sentiments. Exactly. Yeah. You mentioned about going home, and there's a long, multi-step educational and career path that you followed going home. Can you kind of track it for us a little bit, your education and your occupation?
Yeah, well, I returned briefly to my old job with the Pennsylvania Railroad as a sheet metal worker. But I knew this wasn't going to be mine. My family were all blue-collar workers, and I was one of them. But I decided I'd take advantage of the GI Bill and get a college education, which the government, our country, very generously offered to me. And I took it with the idea of going into business as a business major. But after I got to Otterbein, I was influenced tremendously by a history professor, Dr. Hancock, who not only taught me a lot about history, but showed me how to teach it too. And that's when I changed my major and became a history teacher.
And you have stories in the classroom, and you have stories also eventually as a principal.
Yeah, different things. I taught 7 years in the classroom while I was working on my master's to become a principal. I enjoyed the classroom teaching, but I felt as a long-term deal that the administration would be better suited for me. So I did that, which is a blessing in a lot of ways, because had I not taken that path, I wouldn't have met my wife, who became one of my teachers briefly before she became my wife.
Oh, cool. So the vocation of teaching you share with each other, which
Yes,
is really
she
great.
was a music teacher and working on my staff, and it took me a long time to work up the nerve to ask her out, because she was so much younger than I. And that's funny, even over all these years, that's never been a problem with her, more than it was with me anymore.
Oh, I think those of us here and those watching are going to desire that we maintain such a sense of humor that you've maintained all this time.
Well, in the work I was in, I think it helps to have one.
Yes, yes, I share that. I do, I certainly do. Otterbein was the first college, and you went on for the master's and so forth, and you were in the Lima School District?
That's one of the stops along the way. I started out in Somerset in Perry County, a small country high school, and after a number of years there, and I left Somerset briefly to take a coaching position. I was at that point in my career, I didn't know whether I wanted to spend more time in coaching or administration. So I took a job in coaching in another school for 1 year. Decided then that administration was my way to go, so I went back to Somerset as principal. And then from there, after marriage, and we went to Perry High School just outside Lima, and had a nice 4-year career there. And from there, after 4 years, we went to, came to Piqua as principal at Bennett Junior High School. Which had I known anybody else, they might have advised me not to take the job, because supposedly it was a graveyard of principals. And I only lasted 19 years.
Yes, well, that sense of humor certainly must have played a part keeping you through.
Well, I would think so. But working with kids is the best part of it. There are all kinds of kids, of course, among the many thousands that I've dealt with. But by and large, by and very large, good kids, good people.
So if we had a number of viewers of this program who were your students, they would be well up in age themselves, wouldn't be today?
Yes.
And
surprised sometimes when I meet some of them and they identify themselves. I do have a facility for remembering names. Of course, their faces and all have changed. I do remember one particular incident when after I retired, I was working in tax preparation, and had this one man of about 35 then coming up with a full beard and all, and he said, "Bet you don't remember me, do you, Mr. Ashburn?" I looked at him and said, "No, I don't think so." He said, "You would if I bent over your desk." And after he told me, I understood what he was saying.
Yeah, Vivian had included some reference to the term paddling.
No.
One of those major responsibilities back in the day.
Yes, it was. It has limited effects, but by and large, I think it's. I wish we had it today because even the threat of possibly receiving it is a deterrent on a lot of kids.
Right.
Was then and would be now too, I'm sure.
I didn't like it myself, but I respect my father for carrying through. He had a lot of good discipline. You World War II vets knew what was right and what was wrong.
Well, I don't know how good we were at that, but it was a different world then, I guess.
You mentioned a minute ago, when I mentioned the golf, that you're an avid golf watcher. Not that you're a player, but that you're a watcher.
I used to play. I played a lot for a while. Baseball was my real active sport, but by golf. And our two sons were both club professionals in golf for a while, until they found out that's no way to have a family life.
Oh my.
But I played, and I had a better reputation than what I deserved as a player. Because I played a lot, and because my sons were quite capable, people assumed that I was quite good, which unfortunately wasn't true. But like I say, my enthusiasm for the game hasn't changed.
Now, you talked, at one point you were differing between being a history teacher and being a coach. Were you coaching baseball?
I coached baseball, I coached some basketball. I had 1 year in one school of coaching football, of which I knew practically nothing. But I was blessed with a nice, dandy bunch of kids, capable and the right attitudes, and had a very successful year there.
Fantastic.
But I would still say baseball was probably my prime sport in coaching and playing both.
I think we all, of certain generations, still think of baseball as America's sport.
Yes,
you know?
I do.
And we have a lot of concerns that it hold up standards and morals and reputations, and we look back to the great players in our own mind and what they've done along the way and so forth. So you follow baseball, I'm sure.
Oh yeah, very much.
So you're wearing a red jacket but no red symbol.
No red symbol, but if I had one, I would wear it. I am a die-hard Reds fan.
Oh, good for you.
Suffering along with them at the various times, but yeah, definitely a fan.
When you were coaching and at this point you were raising a family and you were teaching, and I'm thinking we're talking about the 50s?
Yes, we got married in 1960. I didn't have a family when I was coaching, which is probably just as well because that kind of job is tough on the family and what they have to sacrifice. So I had that out of my system by the time my wife and family came along.
Very good priorities all the way around there. Information that's been provided to me always brings a smile to my face when I think about the different things that you've done over these years. Miami Valley Veterans Museum honors veterans of all wars. Our location out on 25A in Troy is a former automobile dealership with a wonderful showroom now with Terry Perk as our curator and Karen Perk as executive director and project manager. All of the great wars, all of the conflicts are there represented in pictures and stories and in some cases modeled in uniforms and so forth. You and Harry Christie were both honored a couple weeks ago out there with a breakfast in which Vivian again discussed much of what she shared with me here. As a 99er, you've seen several of your fellow men at war, soldiers at war, Marines, Navy, pass on, and so you have fewer of those guys, perhaps. Are you able to share the stories with grandchildren?
I've been, I don't know how to say criticized, but I've been a little close-mouthed, I guess, about talking too much of them, but every once in a while, one of my sons, we have two sons, one of them will mention something that they remember that I mentioned in the past, and usually something on the hilarious side rather than an actual war experience. And some of it's not always quotable, but
I think both of us would have enjoyed the presence of Bob Hope and all that he did for the wars and presentations and encouragement and motivation.
I had the opportunity when we were overseas in the islands, seeing Bob Hope on, I think it was 3 different occasions.
Oh, terrific.
He always put on a great show with a lot of great talent with him, and very entertaining. And there were a number of others too. I remember Joey Brown, Jack Benny, and others, bands.
The big bands.
The big bands were big then.
Sure. I know I didn't have the privilege of having been in the right place in Vietnam at the right time to have one of those, but I marveled at them on film for years and years and years and so forth. I go back to your mentioning of these things about big band. Let me just share something here. After having served in the Pacific Theater for 2.5 years, Harry had been scheduled for a 60-day leave and was in the orderly room playing pinochle.
Right.
I'll get that right. Listening to the big band swing music and waiting for transportation to go home, and he heard the announcement on the Armed Forces radio again. The joy, I don't think we really can comprehend, even as Vietnam veterans who don't have a real joyful victory day.
Right.
But it must have been tremendous for you to see the end of the war.
It was. We often debated before that time, when it would be over, when we would get to go home, because then when you went overseas, you usually stayed for quite a while. We had some expressions like the Golden Gate in '48 and Home Alive in '45, and that's the one that came true for most of us.
Wow, I hadn't heard those expressions before. Yeah, I don't know if we had any from Vietnam or not like that. There is such a, I'm going to use the word romance. Romance, oftentimes we think it having to do with love, but romance also in literature has to do with adventure. And so we tend to romanticize wars and so forth, and we know war is ugly as well as there is necessary, unfortunately, when we have an enemy which wishes to destroy us.
Yeah.
Can you look back and what you observed about your fellow soldiers or the men in general or the war effort, just kind of a final commentary?
Yeah, well, mine would have been a little different than some because I served as a replacement in a regular Army unit. And most of my companions in the company were from the regular Army pre-war, were in for a different purpose, and some of the rest of us were, where we went in, to serve, either drafted or enlisted ahead of the draft, which I did. So it was eye-opening for me, coming from Pennsylvania originally, to be among so many Texans and Oklahomans, which turned out as a great bunch of guys. I mean, wonderful companions, and I haven't seen enough of them in the years since. There were a couple of occasions that Pat and I went back to Oklahoma for one of their reunions, and it was good to see, but the numbers were already diminishing then, and of course, most of them are pretty well gone by now.
Sure. I know one of our members of the, formerly on the board at the Miami Valley Veterans Museum, Mick Dehart, has done several of these shows here, and he has an annual, or at least seemingly every couple of years, celebration, anniversary, reunion with his fellow soldiers from Vietnam. I don't have that experience, and a lot of us just came home one at a time and never saw anybody ever again. My father-in-law recollects what you do about still collecting those thoughts of those friends that still were with us, and he can contact, that kind of a thing. You're not a big fan of email.
I have email, we use it, but I'm not very conversant with all the ins and outs of it.
So do you occasionally get cards or phone calls from some of your former soldier
I
buddies?
haven't heard from any of them in years now. So the ones that I had been in good touch with, to my knowledge, are all gone.
Sure.
So there may be a few somewhere that I've lost contact with, but
So whatever that magic diet that I keep suggesting you have just didn't get to them, huh?
well, apparently not. Well, some of them lasted quite a while, but
Right.
there
When you
was time.
when you and Harry Christie were invited to the breakfast at the Miami Valley Veterans Museum there earlier this month of May, 2021, did you get a chance to look around a little bit?
A little bit, not a whole lot.
We'll have to give you a personal tour with Terry, especially in
I
World War II.
would want to do that sometime. At my age, I'm not complaining, but my stamina is limited, and I can only last so long at certain things. So what they're doing there is very interesting. I think it's a great idea, and they're following through on it nicely.
Very much. We made the move, we're going into a year since the move took place out there. Ted Jones, who's the producer of this show and editor of this show, has added his visual and creative engineering skills and so forth to our promotion of the museum. Karen is executive director, and again I mentioned Terry as the curator, and a whole group of fantastic volunteers. And they would all, if they were here, invite you to come back and get your personal tour, especially of the World War II area.
Well,
It'd be a wonderful thing.
something to look forward to.
Yes. If you see a vehicle, if you drive by and see a vehicle there, we're open. But do contact, we'll give the phone number here again. And I want to thank Harry Ashburn and his wife for attending here today, giving us an insight into the end of World War II and the life he's lived all the way through that. Again, this has been the Miami Valley Valley Veterans Program, a program highlighting veterans from the Miami Valley and produced by the Miami Valley Veterans Museum, located at 2245 South County Road, 25A in Troy, Ohio. Our phone number, 937-332-8852. Again, Harry, thank you very much for joining us today, and we'll have to do this again. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.